Um, let me just look back at what I told you. What is refactoring? Refactoring is changing something in a small part of your code without changing the external behavior of that code. Once you start changing external behavior of the code, then you call it rewriting. Why would you want to refactor? Well, to improve the readability of your code, the maintainability of your code, or to extend or change or implement something in your code. These are all good reasons to refactor, and even though you usually don't change anything to the behavior. Is it the holy grail of change? No, it isn't. If it is possible to do refactoring, then you should, but otherwise you can do rewriting as well. Well, I compared a bit, made a comparison between refactoring and rewriting, and I told you about requirements, like having a good knowledge of your own code base, having a structured API, so think about your design before you start coding. And of course, write your unit tests and maintain them as well, and run them. I showed you an example of how to do it, and I gave you some tips and tricks. Before stopping this presentation, I want to give some credits where they are due. Creative Commons rocks. Most of the pictures I used here are from Flickr and they're licensed with Creative Commons, so I want to give credits to the people that shot them. Are there any questions? When to refactor? That's a good question. When to refactor? Well, refactoring is about making changes, but you can do it quite early. For instance, what I said with my hard-coded username and password. This user class could, for instance, be already implemented in a prototype of an application, where I just need a dummy username and password to be able to use the login functionality. So even in the prototype phase of your project, you can already start implementing code that you know you will refactor later. Sorry? Oh yeah, there's several reasons that you when you want to do that. For instance, if you run into performance problems, usually old code is not good. I mean, my old code, I wouldn't even want to look at it right now. Old code. If you run into performance problems, is one of the points where you might want to look at refactoring your code to optimize it, but also. If you run into problems, so if you notice that new developers on a project or on the maintenance run into problems getting to know the code, then you know that your code is not really that readable, and you might want to invest time into making it more readable. Of course, it is always a decision that you make for your situation. Is it worth investing time to do this? Sometimes if you just get like 100 euros a month for the maintenance of a website, you probably don't want to start refactoring. But especially for bigger projects where a lot of work is done on the project and probably a lot of money is still coming in, then you might want to do it. And as I said also, early in the project, you may decide, okay, we're going to implement this now, but we know we're going to change the implementation later. But you need to think, of course, that later, what kind of functionality do I want? Because your API needs to support all these options that you might want later. Now, don't overdo this, because you can think of any situation in the future, in years from now, and you don't want to support everything that you want in 5 years later. It's very hard to give you this point where you want to refactor. It's just something that you need to think of in any situation. Any other questions?
Let's suppose that we have a project without unit test. Now, should we do refactor or should we rewrite code? But first, put some unit test.
If you have no unit testing at all, then something went wrong in the initial implementation of your project. I guess it very much depends on your project. If it is not too much investment to just write the unit tests and your code is okay, I mean, you can look at the code and say, well, this code by itself is pretty good. Then you probably just want to write unit tests and change those things that you want to change. But if you look at the code and, well, the code is just not good enough, then you may think, well, I'm just going to rewrite everything from scratch, but write the tests as well, so that in the future I can make changes.
Yeah, but if the code is okay, I don't want to do anything with it.
Well, there's a difference, of course, between that the code is okay from a functional point of view, and the code is okay from a technical point of view. If you have a nice API and a nice structure in your code, and your code is readable, then technically it's okay. But you still need to make some changes to it. For instance, changing the authentication method from a database to LDAP or from plain text to a database, and that can be done with refactoring. And in that case, as I said before, if you have no code coverage for that, at least that part of the application, write it before you start refactoring. And after you finish your refactoring, run the unit tests again, and you know if it was successful or not. Yeah?
Yeah, you said it's important that to know your code base well. Yeah. Of course. But there is a challenge when you are working with a bigger team on a bigger project. Change requests coming. Make that everybody knows what the code is.
I guess every project should have one lead developer that has the global overview, and that maybe not all the developers know the whole code base, but there should be one person that has the global view over the code base, and who will be able to give pointers to the developers working on specific parts of the code, and who can help them and support them with their work. And if they need to make a change, then this lead developer can sit down with the developer working it and say, well, I think in this case we could refactor it without breaking everything. Or if it isn't possible to refactor it, then this lead developer will be able to get the right people from the other parts of the application in to make these changes correctly and to make sure that everything in the end works as you want it to work. Yeah?
And what is the mean test coverage that you, applications that you work on? First question. And how do you convince your project manager that you should spend a week on refactoring instead of programming new features?
The first question was the code coverage for our projects. I think it's about 80% right now. It depends on the project, of course, but usually we try to get 80% code coverage for our projects. So that's the first question. Next question is how to convince the manager. Well, of course you have to be able to make good estimations on what time you need to do certain changes. But you may be able to convince them by telling them, well, if I spend a week now refactoring this, then I know that I can save a month later on in the project because it works better now when I make these changes. It's an investment that you make that may save a lot of time in the future. Of course, it will be hard to convince the manager anyway, but yeah, you need to make some estimations then on, well, I've got a week here. If I spend it here, then down the line, because it's better and I won't run into problems with this code, I may be able to save a month of work.